Hello, fellow griever. This is the Leftover Pieces Suicide Loss Conversations podcast, and I am Melissa, your host. This week, you have found yourself with me for one of my shorter, solo Down the Rabbit Hole episodes. Here, I take you with me on a journey of sorts, through thoughts in my own griefy mind. Some days, I may tackle topics as if I am in Alice's shoes, slaying the Jabberwocky. And on others, I may end up in my own pool of tears. Or I may just go a bit sideways and paint the proverbial roses red. But I always promise an adventure. So let's dive down the rabbit hole and see just what sorts of madness we might discover together. I am glad you have joined me, because while I do know how lonely this grief is, I also believe we needn't be alone. Welcome. Hello, and welcome to Season 4, Episode 35 of the Leftover Pieces Suicide Loss Conversations podcast. And I'm Melissa, your host. Today, we go down the rabbit hole to talk about life after suicide loss. Specifically, we get into the words that we use for those specific days. And by days, I mean the significant days, specifically the birthday of our loved one, and most commonly, the amount of words and the different words that come into play for the day that our loved one died. So why is this something I'm even talking about? Well, it comes up actually a lot more than you would think in communities where grievers gather. I will tackle the first one because it feels like the easiest for me. And both of these have been very relevant for me in the last few months, as I always call the week between June 16th and August 7th, the 7 weeks between June 16th and August 7th as the 7 worst weeks of the year. Because June 16th is Alex's birthday and August 7th is the day that he died 7 years ago. And so that just tends to be the roughest time for me in the year. And on his birthday, which typically our birthdays are a day of celebration, I hear a lot of grievers use the words heavenly birthday. And while I don't take any offense or exception to that terminology, it does hearken to Christianity, doesn't it? So if you are not a believer in heaven or the heavens or God, then referring to your loved one's birthday as a heavenly birthday may not be something that you feel warmly about. Now, again, I don't necessarily take offense to it, but I would never refer to Alex's birthday that way myself. One, as a non-believer, but two, I don't think I would anyway, because I don't tie his birthday at all to his death. Now, that doesn't mean that since he's gone from the earth, that having his birthday isn't hard, because it is. But his birthday didn't change because he died. We added his death day to the calendar, which is the one day that most of us would just soon take off the calendar. However, most of us, I would venture to say, would never want to take our child's birthday off the calendar. Them being born is among the greatest days of our life for most of us parents. So Alex's birthday will occur every year, whether he's on this planet or in the spirit world. And I don't quit choosing or quit counting the years. I know oftentimes, here's more words for you. Many times people say, Alex Mullins, and they list the dates that he was born and died. And then we'll say Forever 21. You especially see this with young suicide loss. You probably see it with other young losses in general, but I live in this world, so I'll refer to this one. But you often see that with, younger people. They say forever 21. Alex lived only 21 years on this world, but we just celebrated in June Alex's 28th birthday. He was still born 28 years ago. And so while I obviously celebrate and acknowledge his birthday differently because I don't have him to share it with, for me, it's still just Alex's birthday. If somebody didn't know that my child was gone and had died, and I had mentioned that, I was taking the day off because it's my son's birthday, that might honestly spark a conversation where they might ask something and then I would have to actually say, well, my son's died and that's why I set aside, because I still set aside that day. Generally, I take it off work the same as I do the day that he died, for a little different reasons, but similar, because that day may be hard. We always do have some form of a celebration because I want to commemorate and celebrate the day that he was born, regardless of whether he's here. So we always have some sort of a cake or sweet that would be appropriate for Alex, and we always have tacos. So for us, we still have a form of celebration for his birthday, and I just call it Alex's birthday. I would be interested to know if anybody has any terminology for birthdays other than just their birthday, or like I had mentioned, some people say heavenly birthday. And I guess the acknowledgement is just that they're now celebrating their birthday from beyond, from somewhere else, whatever. In this case, it would be the belief in heaven. So, I don't choose to say Alex's universal birthday or anything like that. To me, it's just his birthday. The more complicated one, and the one that we're going to delve into a lot more, is the one that I see moms especially stumbling over a lot. And I want to talk about what we say and what we call the day that they died. But I also want to break it down a little bit as to the reasons that I think that we do some of this, and then talk a little bit about, so what do we do? So the things that I hear most common are our child's Angelversary. I hear deathiversary or death anniversary. I hear the anniversary of their death. I hear people say the day he passed or the day he died. And then lately, one that I've heard more often is transition day. In other words, the day they transitioned from this world to the next. And this has been talked about in my support communities. Moms stumble around and don't know what to say and don't feel comfortable with what they're saying. And a way for me to break that down is that it's all a struggle, because this is not a world we were supposed to find ourselves in. This is not a place there's a parent plans to be. There's not even a word for what I am as a mother. If I had lost both of my parents, I would be an orphan. If I lose my spouse, I would be a widow or a widower if I were a male. But when you lose your child, they don't even put a word to it, because I believe it's just one of those things that's horrific. And as a culture, we've shoved it into the shadows because it's not something you want to give a name to because you don't want to speak it, right? So I think that's part of why it makes knowing what term to put on it hard. But I'll go a step further in saying that I think it's also hard because we typically celebrate anniversaries. So when when you talk about someone's anniversary, their marriage anniversary, it's obviously a celebration. And I think that's the most common thing people think of when they hear the word anniversary. So when people say Angelversary or death anniversary, which are both tied to that word anniversary, it just rings a little strange for me. Now, the Angelversary rings strange for me for two reasons, which, I've already piggybacked on, so I'm sure you're filling in the blank there. I don't want to refer to the day Alex died as his Angelversary because I'm not a person of faith, Christian faith. or for that matter, I think, Catholic faith and things, their belief in angels is very strong. And while I do believe in a spiritual world, I don't see it in exactly the same way. An Angelversary just sounds too sweet for me. There's nothing sweet or nice about the day that Alex died. And I'm a realist at heart. I'm a studier of Stoicism, ancient philosophical Stoicism, because I'm a more realist at heart. So for me, I personally choose to just say the day that Alex died or the date that he died. It sounds factual. It sounds real, rooted in reality. And it's what I'm most comfortable with, is just kind of calling it like it is, which is the day that he died. Now, I will tell you that one of the reasons I believe this is so difficult for people to get to a place that they're comfortable with what they want to say is because they aren't yet comfortable with saying words like died or dead in relationship to their child. Quite often you hear people stumble back and forth between the day he passed, when we lost him, when they went to heaven. Those things are hard for us to get past, those lighter terms, because when we venture into the world of death and dead and dying and died, it feels more permanent to us. So what I've come to understand is that there are often different words and phrases that we use when we are in different stages, or, bad word. I don't do the stages of grief. You guys know that. But when we are in different places or phases of our grieving seasons. And so for me, I found that I too often talked about when Alex passed away or when we lost Alex in the earlier years. Because then I was still grappling with my acceptance level. I was still grappling with the permanence of the loss of my child here on earth. And until you really kind of do some of that deep trauma healing work and get to a place where talking about the fact that they died, and then even saying the word that my child died, and go a step further, my child died by suicide, until we're able to say those things, we of course are not going to just say, August 7th is the day my son died, because it sounds like what it is, a very final and permanent situation. And let's be honest, it is. But that doesn't mean that we have to be okay with saying it that way in the beginning, because we're not there yet. We may not be ready. And with that being said, I'm in no way saying that you ever have to get to a place where you readily use the words died in reference to your child. If you prefer the words passed or lost, that's perfectly acceptable, as long as that's what you're comfortable with and that's what resonates with you. And at the risk of sounding somewhat controversial, if you feel like you have accepted your child's death and you are doing everything in your power to move forward and heal your trauma and learn to live successfully alongside of your grief, and the words that you choose to use are still what I would consider the softer words like past or lost, then that's perfectly fine. There isn't any right or wrong in this journey, as I say all of the time. I just know a lot of people say those things in the beginning in order to be softer about the loss, which makes complete sense. And for me, I was that way too. For me, words and languages are so very powerful. I use the spoken word to communicate. I also use the written word to communicate in all of the books and chapters I write. So for me, words are really indicative of what's going on inside of me and the feelings behind them. So when I did some soul searching and realized that I used to say the softer words, and I was probably more hesitant. I didn't know exactly which ones I wanted to use, so I waffled back and forth and changed them up, because I was so uncomfortable with the entire situation. There's nothing about losing our child that's comfortable. And I'm not going to say that it's comfortable now, but I would say that I live in a place of total acceptance of Alex's death, but I also have moved into a space of connection with him in spirit, where while I know Alex died, again, that acceptance level, what I'm now working on is my relationship with him now, which is in spirit. So because it's almost like a bridge occurred for me, and I had to bridge from where I was at in my discomfort and my lack of acceptance and my, wailing and railing against what had happened to bridging over into the place that I'm at now. And I would say that the bridge was probably a couple of years where I was waffling back and forth with how I talked about it, what I said, what words I put to it. And why is some of this so complicated for us, right? Well, I think a lot of it goes back to a couple of things. It goes back to how we were raised and the family of origin that we were from, and how death was treated and loss was treated, and possibly how much loss we had in our life, because many of us didn't even experience much loss until we were well into adulthood. And for some people, it's possible their first loss may have been their child. So that would be immensely difficult to figure out how to navigate the first loss, being that most of us that have lost our child have lost grandparents, parents, possibly, even high school friends, other friends, things like that. Most of the time we have a basis for loss and death that we're a little more comfortable with, because they're in order deaths versus out of order deaths. The death of a child is an out of order death because it wasn't one we ever expected to happen. The order of things are that our grandparents die, our parents die, we die at some point, whether we die before or after our siblings die, one or the other of us will die as spouses, but we always expect that we will die before our children. So by far the most complicated death to talk about. And I found that some of the things that helped me transition into a space where I was more comfortable with the death. And wait, I'll just segue and go backwards for just a minute and talk about my family of origin. One, because we didn't have a lot of death. I was out of my parents' home before I experienced my first family death, which would have been my grandparents. And I think I know all of my children were well into probably at least middle school before my first grandparent died, or their great grandparent. So and my dad died 25 years ago. He was only 48. So that was my first significant death, but I was 30 when that occurred. So I was out of the house by, over 10 years, by about 12 years. And so for me, we never talked about death. We didn't have a rhetoric for it. Death is a part of life. It's a very natural part of life. It's the one thing besides being born that we will all do at some point. And yet it's one of the things that we avoid talking about the most and fear the most. So it's a huge process to get ourselves to that place. And for me, there were some things in the last 7 years that have made getting to the place that I am now of acceptance much easier. And for me, there were two things in a nutshell that made the most difference or created the most impact in my world that did allow me to move and progress. And those two things were knowledge, which I'll touch base on in a minute, and quite simply becoming more comfortable with death. The death of our human selves, which is where I branched into understanding what's beyond this life. I branched into human life and the evidence that exists that there is still energy and a life force that lives beyond our human body. I learned that life as we know it isn't necessarily final. Life in our human body is, but life of our energy force is not. And I learned an awful lot about death in general. And I know that that's not something that everybody would be comfortable doing. But I even got into understanding cultures and how they celebrate the life of their loved one after they're gone for the rest of their life. In our Western culture, which I know I've often talked about how broken we are in how we handle grief and loss, but in our Western culture, the tradition seems to be we go through those steps in that first week of having a memorial service. Many of us even call it a celebration of life now. And we do all of that, and then we kind of close the book and walk away as a culture. We bury or cremate or have whatever ceremony and final arrangements. And then the expectation of our culture is that we grieve or mourn for a brief period of time. And unfortunately, in our culture, it seems to be like a couple of weeks or months that they expect that to happen. They, meaning our culture and community as a whole. And then we're just expected to pick up and move on. We don't have traditions in this culture here in America, if you will, regarding the continuation of still having our person in our world. I know we often talk about how uncomfortable people become when we bring up our lost loved one. And from personal experience, I can tell you that when we are more comfortable with our situation, we can affect a change on others being more comfortable with our situation. So once we're able to lead the way with what we expect with regard to this loss, others can fall in line. So I'm not saying that we're ever going to learn to like this loss or even really be okay with it. But what I am challenging you with a little bit and possibly suggesting is that the more we learn, the more we absorb knowledge and educate ourselves and, dare I say, immerse. I guess I can, because whether we want to admit it or not, we are very immersed in the loss of our child after they're gone. It becomes all-encompassing. So if you take that and add learning to it, learn about death. For me, I learned a lot about suicide and why people end their life. I learned as much as I possibly could. And then for me, I also tended to bathe myself or immerse myself just in death culture in general. I see myself as a grief coach and support group leader and author, as someone who works in the after-death space. I don't work myself in a space of before death. I don't work in prevention, although I will tell you I know that postvention can absolutely become prevention and work alongside of it. My heart and my calling has been to work with those that are left behind, which means I do work in the after-death space, which means for me, in order to do this effectively, in order to not only grieve Alex effectively and successfully, which that sounds strange to even say out loud, but I hope that you know what I mean by that. By successfully grieving, I mean that we are living the best version of our life that we can live under the circumstances. And that is progressive. So that means today. Today you're living the best version that you can live, with the hope and promise that you can live an even better one as you continue on, as you get stronger. So what we need to do to be more comfortable with our loss, with the words that we use around our loss, in my humble opinion, is to learn as much as we can, to gain as much knowledge as we can. We need to learn to heal our trauma and develop healthy grief habits. We need to learn to build rituals and memorials into our life on an ongoing pattern and occurrence, and we need to become more comfortable with death and the beliefs around it. And I think from there, from your own world and your own experiences, the words you choose will match how you feel and where you are, because they'll be coming from an authentic space inside of yourself. So I hope somehow this made a little bit of sense today. I know we started on words and went much deeper, but as we know in this loss, words are complicated because it's really hard to put a word to all of the complexity that exists behind suicide and the loss of our loved one. So I'll end for today, but I'll have you and your loved ones in my thoughts. And until next time, talk soon. So we'll conclude here for today, but I just wanted to say a few things before you go. If you're new to the podcast and have not listened to the very first episode called Intro Episodes Start Here, all the way back at the beginning of Season 1, I would encourage you to do so that you know what to expect from the leftover pieces, because I do have several different styles of episodes that I record, and we do release weekly, almost all of the time. So I hope that you will come back often to join us in this community of suicide loss survivors. If you have not already, also, I would encourage you to check out theleftoverpieces.com, where you can find and have access to all of the things that I currently offer. Some of those things are online Zoom support groups, links to my books, educational opportunities that I'm adding all the time, as well as different downloadables and resources for all suicide loss survivors. And if you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the podcast, or you'd just like to connect with me for any other reason, you can do it through the website as well. So until next time, I just want to remind you that I know how lonely this grief is, but you don't have to be alone. Talk soon.